So we'll now hear from Michael Morton, who was wrongfully convicted in the state of Texas.
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you, Neil, for the invitation to speak here. I appreciate it. I would like to thank my wife, Cynthia, for getting me here on time. And thank you, Peter, for making it possible. My name is Michael Morton, and I am known in the United States for serving about a quarter century in the penitentiary. I was labeled a wife killer. I did not make parole or escape. I had a DNA exoneration. Been in a ton of the media, all levels, from 60 Minutes, even been in the Shanghai Times newspaper. If you have Netflix, there's a documentary about me. Just type my name in the box and it'll pop up. It's called An Unreal Dream, and I've written a book called Getting Life. But more than any of that, I think the important thing is to ask, why should you listen to me? A lot of people want to teach you something or sell you something. And I think you should listen to me because I'm you. I used to be very average. I used to be married. We had a child. We both had careers. We lived in the suburbs. We had a really nice house. We were thinking about having another child. Lived in a very good neighborhood. I had no criminal record at all. And in 1986, the day after my 32nd birthday, about the time I left for work, a man entered our house and beat my wife to death in our bed while my son was in the next room. It's very gruesome. Unless you're a policeman, unless you spend any time at crime scenes, it's not what you think it is. It's not like the movies, and it's not like books. It's definitely not like a TV show. There was blood on the walls and the ceilings. There was brain matter across the room on the floor that I saw. That was August. The middle of September, the sheriff showed up on my front doorstep. Obviously, a lot of things happened in between there, but he showed up to arrest me 6 weeks later. While being arrested was bad, I think the worst part was having my 3.5-year-old son pulled from my arms because he hadn't seen the police at our house since the day his mother was murdered, and they were back. And there's nothing like being arrested. The first time I was handcuffed and put in the backseat of that police car, my worldview changed. I had a tangible, concrete sense of the power of the state. Because when the officials with the government decide that they need to focus on you, it's the entire weight of the state coming after you. And you lose your autonomy, you lose your sense of decision-making, and you become a different person. They decide what goes on in your life. That was September. By February of 87, I had a trial. It's a couple weeks long. Guilty verdict, life sentence. Life sentence, everything. 87 was a long time ago. If you think about it, Ronald Reagan was in the White House. The USSR was still around. I'd never been on the internet. I'd never seen a Starbucks. And I was 32 years old. I wasn't one of these guys who had a court-appointed lawyer. I had good lawyers. I spent everything I had to get these good lawyers. They fought very hard and they did an excellent job, but they smelled a rat. There was something wrong in the process. There was something they couldn't get at it, whatever it was. And they were good lawyers, but that didn't matter. I still went to the penitentiary. You lose a lot when you go to the penitentiary. I lost my son, most important thing to me, lost my freedom, and my reputation. You may not think about your reputation. I wasn't a public figure. I wasn't known across the state. But just like you, I had a reputation. The people on my street where I lived knew me. The people at work, the people you work with or you go to school with, they know what you'll do. And they know what you won't do. And you have that reputation. When the state arrests you, you lose that. I also lost all my money. Every asset I had acquired, I spent it on good lawyers. But that ran out. And then my parents spent everything they had, because when somebody gets arrested, it just doesn't affect the person being arrested. There are concentric circles of impact that it hits, from family members to friends and co-workers. Losing your assets is one thing, but I also lost almost all of my friends, all my co-workers, because most people believe that where there's smoke, there's fire. And when I say smoke, police investigation, indictment, trial, jury, all of it. Sooner or later, everybody asks about prison. Most of you haven't been to prison yet. I hope that never happens. But your entry into prison seems very abrupt. It may not be, but it seems very quick. It jars you. One day you're in county jail, next minute you're in there. And it's a very steep learning curve. There's no time for contemplation or planning. It's in your face, and it is very, very immediate. It's a sometimes violent place, but just the crime scene is not like a movie. Neither is the penitentiary. It's not the Shawshank Redemption. It's not Oz. But it is violent. Sometimes. Not relentlessly. It happens. But it's not every day, every minute. More than anything, if you want to know about the penitentiary, know that it is repetitive and predictable and grinding and boring, and you know what's going to happen every day, every week, and every month within a range of possibilities. I sometimes say it's soul killing, and I don't mean that in a hyperbolic sense. I mean that it makes you less than a human being. And I mean that by there never has been, and there never will be, another 445394. That was my number. I couldn't get my mail. I couldn't talk to anybody in authority. I couldn't get health care. I could sometimes not even move around unless I was able to produce that number or my ID that had that number. I was no longer Michael Morton. I was 445394. I don't care if you really live in a nice section of town. You may drive a Ferrari and have lots and lots of resources. And at the same time, it doesn't much matter if you live in really substandard housing and your car breaks down all the time and your neighbors assault you and steal your stuff. No matter what end of the spectrum you're on, you get used to it. I guess that's part of the human condition. I got used to being in the penitentiary. And one of the ways I did that, I had a survival technique, a coping mechanism. And what I did is I hardened my heart. I was in a tough place with some very tough people, so I became the tough guy. I learned that there are a lot worse things than losing a fight. A busted lip will heal, a puffy eye will go down. I learned not to back down. And that was the way I decided I could survive in there. While I was still trying to be that tough guy and live in there, I was hanging on to my son. The most important person in my life was my son. Until you have a child, if you're like me, or I think almost everybody, until you have a child, you're the center of your universe. Everything depends, every decision you make, everything is predicated on how it's going to affect you, what's going to happen to you because of this decision or this act. When you have a child, it's as if something chemically happens within you, and all the parents will tell you right now that their lives are about them. What what's going to happen to the child because of this or that. And my son was my reason to live, to hope. I envisioned that somehow, someday, I didn't know how or what, but I was going to get out. Almost all prisoners eventually get out. And I wanted to reconnect with my son and convince him that I wasn't the killer that he thought I was. He'd been told I was. He was the reason I got out of bed in the morning. He was the reason I didn't hang myself in my cell. And while I was still the tough guy, I understood this softness I had to have about my son to keep that spark of love alive. And yet I was inside for a long time. And I had the unique situation in that I knew who was responsible for my incarceration. I hadn't murdered my wife. I knew who had lied on the witness stand. I knew who had testified against me. I knew who was responsible. And I spent those years, many of those years, planning the murders of those people that I knew were responsible for my incarceration, the people who had taken everything from me. And I thought of different ways and different days, my MOs all over the place, possible alibis, and I was a very, very angry man because I'd lost everything and I knew who had done it to me, and I was going to get out and I was going to make them pay. I was going to get them. And living in there, you learned a lot of things. And I was convinced I was just the guy that could do this because I had nothing to lose. Those things take a time. They take a toll. The calendar goes by. Years past while all this is happening within me. Holidays and birthdays, anniversaries. Oh, man. Family members died while I was inside, and I couldn't attend the funerals. Appeals failed. Everything we tried failed. And while I was not enjoying that place in there, I knew what to do. And I knew what to do, and I knew what to expect. And between being the tough guy and having predictability in my life, it made it bearable, I thought. One of the odd things that happened was one of the attorneys I had hired at my trial just happened to be a friend of Barry Scheck. Peter and Barry founded the Innocence Project. And my lawyer, Bill, gave Barry my file and asked if they would accept me. And he said, of course. Well, I thought I was in. My lawyer was a friend of the guy who had helped found the Innocence Project. But the Innocence Project doesn't work that way. Friends don't matter. They have a very rigorous way of separating the wheat from the chaff. So my file went at the bottom, just like anybody else's, and slowly worked its way up the stack. Takes years sometimes, and I waited, and I waited. An odd thing happens to you in the penitentiary. You spend countless nights laying on your bunk looking at the ceiling and reflecting on your life. And I promise you, and I'm here to tell you, that you will remember everything you've ever said, everything you've ever done. And many of those things you regret. Because none of us live, or none of us have a perfect life. It occurred to me too, laying on my bunk, thinking about this stuff, that nothing had ever broken me. My son had been born with a congenital heart defect. And a few months before his mother was murdered, he had open heart surgery. That was and remains to this day the worst thing that ever happened to me. But it had not broken me. My wife's murder obviously didn't break me. The trial, the media attacks, losing all my friends, all my money, none of that broke me. And brokenness is an odd thing. It's a bit of, when you have nowhere to go and nothing to do and you're completely lost, it's like a physical or spiritual or emotional bankruptcy. You don't know what to do. And nothing had done that to me. All those failed appeals, the deaths of my family, I was still plugging along because I was the tough guy. Even the brutality of the penitentiary didn't do it, because it is a hard place. And I was always on maximum security units because I had a life sentence for murder. One thing that almost broke me, I just realized that while I had never been broken, when my son was in early teens, he came to see me, and he was there to tell me that we weren't going to visit anymore. He was tired of coming to see me. And that didn't break me, but I remember it hurt. It was like being punched in the face, you know, that numbness you feel. But it didn't break me. And I don't know why. A number of years went by, and in 2001, my son turned 18. And my son is my reason for getting up in the morning. My son is the reason I live, the reason I kept going on, because I wanted to reconnect with him. Nothing and no one was more important than my son. And I got a piece of mail, not from my son, but about him. And I learned that he was going to legally change his name, and he was going to be adopted by the people who were raising him. And I don't know if this was the worst thing that ever happened, or if it was just accumulation of all the bad things. But that broke me. For that point in my life, I did a very unusual thing because I didn't know what to do. I cried out to God, you know, help, show me something. You know, I got nothing here. And that's pretty much what I got back, that quiet, nothing, just, you know, crickets. Because of the arc of my life, what had been happening, I got to tell you, that's kind of what I expected. Another disappointment. A couple weeks later, I was in my cell, and my cell partner was on the bottom bunk. He was asleep. It was nighttime. It was time for me to go to sleep too. My plan was to turn off the little lamp next to my bunk and put on my radio headphones and go up and down the dial a little bit and call it a night. I had done this thousands of times before, and every indicator that was out there told me I was going to be doing this for thousands of more times. Years were ahead of me because I have a life sentence. So I put on my headphones, and I turned off the light, and I picked up a little classical radio station out of Houston, and I heard some harp music. In my mind, there was a woman playing a harp. Might have been a guy, but it sounded like a woman playing a harp. With no premonition or warning, I just, like that, found myself bathed in golden light. All I could see was golden light, and it was warm. And I heard a ringing or a roaring in my ears, and I felt great. I felt warm and wonderful and excited and calm. And I'd never ever experienced anything like that before. And I knew without a doubt, I did not have to ask, it was self-evident that I was in the presence of God. And it was absolute bliss. But more important than that, and larger than that, and more impactful than anything I imagined, I felt His love aimed right at me individually. Personally, me. And that changed me. The next thing, I heard my alarm going off, and I woke up. And it was morning, and I knew what it was, but I didn't know why. And I thought about it for a long time, and it occurred to me that Occam's razor applied. Occam's razor is just the notion that if you have the simplest explanation for something is probably the best one until proven otherwise. And the simplest one that I'd asked and I received. That's simple. And I knew that I wanted to be better. I was different inside. I wanted what was right and worthy and good. And I wanted to be forgiven. And we all know that if you want to be forgiven, you have to forgive. And I remembered all of those plots, the people I was going to kill, and how I was going to do it. I didn't want to, but I consciously forgave that first person. And it stunned me because I felt lighter and cleansed and renewed. And I just felt wonderful. It was a good thing for me. And so I forgave the next person. And then I forgave the next person. I cannot explain it. It didn't make any sense because I was going to kill them. I was planning how to do it. And they didn't know that I was going to do it. That was part of it. And I also realized that they didn't know that I'd forgiven them. They were not part of the equation. Forgiveness was for me. I was the one forgiving them, and I was the one receiving the benefit. It was counterintuitive. It did not make sense. And I don't want you to think that this was one of those New Testament hallelujah stories, brother. I saw the light and the gates of prison opened up. I'm not that guy. It didn't happen that way. I was inside for another decade. But I was different inside. A friend and a lawyer one time told me that when you have revenge and hatred in your heart like that for somebody else, it's like drinking poison and then hoping that guy over there dies from it. The lack of forgiveness hurts you, not them. Well, about this time I had worked my way up towards the top of the Innocence Project stack. And we started getting limited access to stuff, but not much success. While I was inside, the man who prosecuted me became a state district judge, and a new district attorney came up under him. And then in 2011, in June, we ran just about the last piece of evidence we could into a lab. And my late wife's DNA was on there, as was another strand of DNA not belonging to me, but belonging to a guy. And this is great news, but it's not a get-out-of-jail-free card. In fact, a couple months later, on my birthday, I got news that DNA had been run through the CODIS system, and it belonged to a guy named Norwood with a long criminal history. He was the guy. The Innocence Project is full of some very smart, accomplished lawyers, and they also use lawyers from whatever state they're in. They were running a parallel legal attack because nobody knows what a DNA test is going to produce. And they filed something akin to a Freedom of Information Act request. And we got the sheriff's file and the prosecutor's file from 86 and 87. In that file were police reports from our neighbors. Said they had seen a van pull behind our house and a guy get out and walked our fence and cased the house a couple times before my wife's death. Reported my wife's credit card being used in another city a few days after her death. And then something called the Monster Transcripts, which was just a recitation of my son's story about witnessing the murder. No one knew that he had witnessed the murder. Even the professionals had taken him to before I went to the penitentiary. As any lawyer will tell you, the veracity and the materiality of these issues is not the point. Suppression was the point because in the United States, the prosecution was required to turn over evidence to the defense that might negate their guilt or lessen their sentence. I told you that my attorneys had smelled a rat. That was the rat. That evidence that would have cast great doubt on my guilt. I walked into the penitentiary on March 4th, 1987. I walked out on October 4th, 2011. So there's a bit of shorthand if you want to know how long I was in prison. It was 24/7, 24 years and 7 months to the day. A lot has happened since I went from that world of concrete and steel to that first hotel room that had a marble floor in the bathroom and gold fixtures in the tub and the sink. Freedom is a wonderful thing. I've reconnected with my son in every way. I've married Cynthia. That guy who prosecuted me became a judge. We had a court of inquiry in Texas. He was removed from the bench as a plea deal, lost his law license, had some other little fines, and he did a little bit of jail time. First time in the United States, I am told, that a prosecutor has ever done jail time for misconduct in a murder trial. And we had the Morton Act passed that I did not name. It's in Texas. And All that basically says is that prosecution is required to give us information that lessens our guilt or maybe our sentence before the trial, during the trial, and after the trial. It's the strongest discovery law in the United States. Great story, wonderful thing. I'm out. Life is good. I'm happy, reconnect with my son. But what does this mean to you? Many of you many of you are students. Some of you looking for maybe law school. I know there's some policemen here, some lawyers. What my life should show you is that you can do things you don't think you can do. If you've never had a severe, serious, life-threatening medical situation, or if you have never faced bankruptcy or a marital collapse, or maybe just a spiritual crisis, you will. Everybody does. And if I can get through my thing, you can get through yours. I know you can. My life has taught me that no matter how tough you are on the outside, you still have that soft spot inside of you. You still have a heart. I had a heart for my son. And I got through what I did because of three simple things. And if you can internalize that, you'll get through anything. Number one, God exists. Number two, He is wise. He's smarter than me, smarter than you. And number three, He loves you individually. I know this. You can do anything. I know. I want to thank you for your attentiveness and your politeness and your willingness to listen to a layperson like me. Thank you and bless you. Few short minutes. Quick questions or long ones? Yes.
Thank you, Michael, for that. So I teach a wrongful conviction seminar every year now at the University of San Francisco. Before that, UC Irvine, the last 20 years. Mix up the book list. This year I signed your book. There were several other books of individuals who were wrongly convicted, memoirs that I had assigned. Not surprisingly, needless to say, the students loved your book. Well-written, engaging, poignant, thoughtful, heaps of praise on the book. We watched the movie Unreal Dream. But the one thing that they complained about in your story, your amazing story, is they wanted more of a system critique, right? What did your 24 years and 7 months and your reflection and your experience teach you about the failures of the system beyond your case, or of which your case is an exemplar?
Great question, because my particular situation, because I was so average, because I had no criminal record, one of the things that I came away with, it's not real popular idea, but I tell people that it's true. Look at me. And this idea is rather simple. Like it or not, everything the government touches, everything they become involved with, sooner or later, they screw it up. Government is a force for good, we hope. But that's not its nature. In the United States, we have a particular document, a founding document, a ruling document called our Constitution that puts the government in a box. Because the people who founded the United States realized from history and personal experience that the natural progression of the people that we have ruling over us is not always good. Bureaucracies tend to grow and become less competent. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Smaller, faster, cheaper isn't the way of our government. While I was inside, I watched, in 25 years that I was inside there, the government provided me the clothes. They got worse as the years went by. They provided the food. It got worse as the years went by. They provided the health care. It got worse as the years went by. It's not a direct line, but it always needs reform and alteration and correction. And that's not just true of criminal justice. It's anything they do. And while my situation was something of a microcosm, clothes, food, healthcare, really basic stuff, I didn't see one area where it got better. And I was in a situation where the state provided me with everything that kept me alive. I mean, the most basic things. And they couldn't do it well. Not the happiest note, but that's what I learned. How are we doing on time?
Can I ask a quick question? Did people treat you differently in prison because you were maintaining your innocence, Michael? I meant to ask David as well.
The penitentiary is a really harsh environment, kind of like the worst, rudest locker room you can imagine, and it's not real prudent to go around claiming you're innocent. There's something of a food chain inside. Out of a bit of dumb luck, I was thrown in there as a murderer, so I'm automatically at the top of the food chain. But no matter what your crime, even though it is a part of your identity, people depend more on how you treat them, how fair or unfair, how strong or how weak. So there were very few people who I became close with that I would confide in as things were moving along. But for the most part, I don't think that many people knew, because I certainly didn't tell them.
I ask because I often, people will ask me, well, doesn't everybody in prison maintain their innocence? Everybody in prison says they're innocent, and I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, that's a free will trope. I saw very few people who claimed to be innocent. The only people I saw who were very constant in trying to be evasive about their crimes were the child molesters. They were always, robbing the 7-Elevens or, doing some kind of drug deal. But your identity in there is your crime. Even though some guys will say, well, I may have raped that woman, but I'm not a rapist. Yeah, you are. And so you may plead your innocence, but you don't do it with the prison population. For one thing, they can't help you. But you will contact people at the Innocence Project. You will write to the police or the courts, the judges, anything and everything, because no matter what people say, every prisoner wants the same thing. They want to get out, and they'll do just about anything to get out.
Question over here. Here. Sorry, to your right. Do you find that even after your exoneration, do you still face some types of stigma, whether it's, we've talked about people who just can't get it out of their heads, they'll stick to their confirmation bias, or whether it's positive that people kind of treat you lightheadedly or, tiptoe around it, don't want to offend you, that kind of thing?
Well, there is something where people try not to offend me, but I'm beyond embarrassment. You can't ask me anything that's going to make me feel uncomfortable. And I'm in a very unusual situation. My exoneration was very public. Not only did we catch the guy that really did it, we also found the prosecutor withheld evidence, and there was action against him. I got out. When I went inside, it was as if the peasants were after me with pitchforks and torches. The media painted me as a murderous perv. And when I got out, I was like the golden boy in the little town where I was from, just north of the state capital. The first maybe 9 months when I was back and forth with legal proceedings and courthouse appearances, I couldn't pay for a restaurant tab. I would try to call for the check, and they were, sorry, honey, it's taken care of. People would run out of stores and shake my hand and hug my neck. It was an exact opposite of what had happened to me on the way in. People were just super supportive and really, really nice, and I haven't run into anybody who's been a real jerk. And if they are, that's their problem, not mine. I'll let it go. But people have been wonderful to me. I have no complaints. My life is fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was kind of curious earlier, and just now you mentioned that the media kind of targeted you. I was wondering if when you hear about cases now, when they're being sensationalized, does it make you kind of critical of what's happening to them? Like, Yeah.
Sure. One of the things that I learned was that the people in the media, whether they be television, radio, internet, TV, newspaper, doesn't matter. The only thing they know about these crimes, the only thing they know about the person being arrested, is what the authorities tell them. When I got arrested, I was at booking, I was handcuffed, and as we were going through the process, this other cop walked up and asked the booking sergeant, what's with all the reporters outside? And he just kind of pointed at me. When I came to jail, when I was arrested that first time, the media was already there. They'd been tipped off, hey, we're bringing him in. Got to arrest in that murder case. And the sheriff's department made their statement, here's the guy, here's why, here's what it is. And that evening there was a gag order issued, so we could not talk about anything. And I understand that manipulation. So I try not to be cynical. I try to be analytical. And so I may look at some things with a little bit of a jaundiced eye. But I also know that the vast majority of the people that go through the criminal justice system are guilty. They did commit murder. They did rob. They did rape. They did whatever they did. We exonerees are a bit of a sliver of the prison population. But if it could happen to him, if it could happen to me, there's no reason it could happen to you. And we have to make the government that we allow to rule over us to be accountable and to be transparent and to be honest. How long do you want this to go?
Last question.
Okay.
I was just wondering, once you got out, did you come in contact with the people who did testify against you?
Yes, and some of them, in fact, the day that I got out, as we left the courthouse, I was in my brother-in-law's truck, family in the back, and we're leaving the parking lot, and Barry, Peter's partner in crime, was at the curb, and he had a woman by the hand, and he flagged us down. And she had been on my jury, and she was in tears. She had been a high school English teacher for the last 25 years, and she had told every one of her classes about her part in that sensational murder trial because she'd been on the jury and she saw everything and she'd put this guy away and the system works and, rah-rah. Well, everything that came out upon my release just crushed her. And she appeared in the documentary. I tried to reassure her as much as I could because vital evidence was withheld from her too. When the prosecutor withholds exculpatory evidence, it's just not from the defense. It's from the judge, it's from the jury, it's from the media. So that was the crime. But, she wasn't, I didn't feel like she was responsible. Now, I have talked to some of the other people. Some won't talk to me. Some are a little bit frightened. But most of them have realized that I've honestly and fully, completely forgiven them. And if they have any issues, that's on them. I got a life to live. Sorry. We're good? Thank you.